The typical choice for a gaming CPU usually falls somewhere in the quad-core region, whether that be one of AMD's FX series or an Intel i5 CPU. But my curiosity led me to wonder what the ramifications would be if I checked out most of the major new GPU releases against a dual-core Pentium setup. Would all of the new GPUs be bottlenecked, including the lower-end AMD RX 460? How much would each one be held back by? Can a Pentium be justified as a proper choice for a gaming PC if you're on a strict low budget? How much do varying resolutions impact the CPU bottlenecking, and does DirectX12 make any difference? Armed with a plethora of GPUs and the Pentium G4520 from Wootware, and well, nearly 200 benchmarks later, I think I've found some fairly interesting answers. First though, a quick overview on why a Pentium might bottleneck a graphics card. The basic idea is that a game sends blocks of information to both a CPU and GPU to process, and for the sake of getting properly displayed graphics on your screen, the CPU and GPU need to process the same frame at the same time. The dual-core Pentium can only process games so fast regardless of clock speed due to only having 2 routes for the processing to go through. Even if you had a Pentium running at 4 GHz, it could only process something 2/3 as quickly against a quad-core running at 3 GHz. Obviously, this is an oversimplification, and games don't directly scale with frequency or cores, but the general idea is that more lanes on the CPU can be more helpful than faster lanes, up to a point, which I'll examine in later videos. Quick note on my testing though, I'll be pitting the Pentium G4520 against an i7-6700K as reference. The system was run with 16 GB of RAM at 2400 MHz, and the graphics cards used were the RX 460, RX 470, and RX 480 on the AMD side, and on the Nvidia side there was the GTX 1060 3 and 6 GB editions, GTX 1070, and GTX 1080. For the games, it's a mixture of newer titles that have both DirectX11 and DirectX12 benchmarks, as well as some past favorites of Grand Theft Auto 5 and Metro Last Light, but all of them running at the same nearly maxed out detail settings. The next few minutes are going to just be a litany of benchmarks. I'll do my best to simplify the information for you, but most likely you should pause the video whenever you deem necessary in order to extract the data that you're particularly looking for. First up, Ashes of the Singularity is a relatively CPU-bound game, and it shows, for the most part, with the Pentium at the helm. In DX11 at 1080p, the RX 460 sees an improvement over the 6700K, but still isn't playable. The rest of the cards suffer anywhere from a 35 to 58% loss, with all of the cards, even the GTX 1080, topping out at around 25 FPS. DirectX 12 frees up the bottleneck a little bit and allows the 1080, 1070, 1066 gig, and RX 480 to get somewhere near a 30 FPS average. Not surprisingly, going down the line of resolutions, 1440p and 4K, DX11 and 12 offer the same sort of restrictions on every card, with most of them taking a significant double-digit percentage hit. Deus Ex Mankind Divided at 1080p in DX11 shows little throttling for the lower-end cards of the 460, 470, and both GTX 1060s. It's still present, but minor. The 480 and higher-end Pascal cards suffer over 10% losses, but still are playable. DX12 shows more bottlenecking on every single card rather than helping anything. At 1440p DX11, every card experiences less than a 10% loss, with both the 480 and 1066 gig showing essentially no loss. In DX12, it's roughly the same, with certain cards even performing slightly better. At 4K, the 460 and 1063 gig are positively crippled in DX11, with negligible issues otherwise. And in DX12, the Pentium basically has no effect on the cards at all. Moving on to Grand Theft Auto 5, at 1080p, both the RX 460 and RX 470 showed to be relatively unaffected by the lower-end CPU, but every other card demonstrated a double-digit loss. At 1440p, every GPU besides the 1070 and 1080 were roughly the same as with the 6700K. And then at 4K, nearly all the GPUs are the same, showing no effective FPS change. Hitman shows huge losses for all cards besides the RX 460, between 35 and 60% again, whether in DX11 or DX12 at 1080p. At 1440p, the losses are lower percentage-wise, but still substantial. 4K, again, same story, large losses, slightly less than at 1440p, but definitely evident. Metro Last Light is similar to Hitman with no loss for the RX 460, but significant elsewhere, which holds true at 1080p or 1440p. At 4K, it's basically a wash between the G4520 and 6700K. Rise of the Tomb Raider DX11 at 1080p shows again loss for all cards. But in DX12, the RX 460 is nearly flat, but the GTX 1063 gig performs slightly better. Again, 1440p shows less, but still significant losses in either runtime, and for 4K, the losses are nearly done away with. Okay, I hope your brain didn't melt off with all of those benchmarks. To summarize, I want to answer the questions that I posed at the beginning of the video. Question 1. Will all of the new GPUs be bottlenecked? Yes and no. The RX 460 had the greatest propensity to still run at full speed regardless of its CPU setup. Its largest loss was a 7% deficit in Rise of the Tomb Raider in DX11, but still performed about the same in DX12, which was its better performing runtime regardless. I'd say if you're picking up an RX 460, a Pentium will more or less be sufficient, especially if you pick up a Z170 board and overclock it as well. The losses IMO were small enough to not really be a consideration, especially since I kept all of the games running at max detail settings, something a typical user wouldn't be doing with a 460. Question 2. How much will each GPU be held back by? At 1080p, a lot, up to 60% in some instances, which is huge. At higher resolutions, the CPU stops being as much of a bottleneck and eases up a bit, being negligible at 4K in some instances, but still provides issues of frame stuttering regardless of the frames per second. And this answers the question about varying resolutions as well. It's a rough experience even if you have the highest end consumer graphics card on the market right now, being the GTX 1080. Question 3. Can a Pentium be a proper choice for a low budget gaming PC? Yes. The limited effects on the RX 460 will likely carry over on similar cards such as the GTX 1050 and lower. Is it going to perform well? No, but it also appears that you wouldn't get much out of buying a 6700K either. However, I wouldn't recommend skimping on the CPU and getting a Pentium if you're going with an RX 470 or GTX 1050 Ti or higher, as you'll be losing out on some performance. And question 4, does DirectX12 make any difference? Sort of. Performance losses were lower in most instances, but not enough to excuse the fact that the CPU was essentially choking on itself. The only singular instance where DX12 helped the card regain the lost performance was with the 460 in Rise of the Tomb Raider. Otherwise, the GPUs were still incredibly crippled. Main conclusion from the entire video. A dual-core CPU without hyperthreading isn't a particularly good choice for a gaming PC if you want to get the best performance out of your GPU if you're spending more than $100 on said GPU. The level and scope of the performance loss will vary from game to game, being worse in those that rely heavily on the CPU, such as Ashes of the Singularity, but it can be readily concluded that the Pentium does create boundaries. Now, for anyone who's wondering how do other CPUs fare, such as an i3, hold on to your horses and I'll have another video covering that information coming out shortly. But now I want to take this time to say thank you to Wootware for sponsoring all of the hardware necessary to make this video possible. If you live in South Africa, Wootware should be your go-to computer shop whenever you're looking to upgrade your system. From a Pentium processor to a GTX 1080, Wootware has you covered for whatever it is you need for your rig. Currently, they're also running a promotion where you can get Sid Meier's Civilization 6 for free if you pick up a Power Color or his RX 480. So if you're in South Africa, head on over to wootware.co.za to woot up your PC. The link will be in the video description. And that's going to wrap it up for this video, guys. Let me know what you thought of this type of in-depth look at the Pentium's performance. Do you like this style of video? Are there other concepts you want me to explore in a similar manner? Or do you want me to stop altogether? I'm keen to have that conversation with you guys down below. Also, leave a like on this video to help communicate those thoughts, as well as a dislike if your sentiments are the opposite. Subscribe if you're new around here and you want to stay up to date on all of my tech-related content, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Cheers.